Hi, welcome to Rocky Mountain Views. I'm your host, Martha Thompson. And today we are interviewing someone that you're going to say, Martha, what were you thinking? Because let me start with, how many lawyer jokes do you know? Well, then you take it a step further, and when you talk about criminal attorneys, the jokes get even bigger, wider, deeper, and worse. And yet, the man sitting with me today is someone that has my absolute admiration, respect, and I know him as a human being, and he's just one of the best people ever. I'd like you to meet Mike Moran.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm thrilled to have you here. So I'd like people to have an idea about just who you are. Tell me a little bit about yourself, how long you've been practicing, and most importantly, why did you choose to be a criminal defense attorney?
Well, I've been a lawyer, it'd be 20 years next month, and when I first started as a young attorney, didn't quite know where I wanted to go. I was interning at the district attorney's office and decided it was an okay job, but it was something that I wasn't really interested in. And your life takes you down just different paths. And I started, at that point, I had just got married and told my wife that I decided that I wanted to practice criminal law. I thought I had a passion for it, I liked it, and back then, geez, you just get out of law school, I was a little bit naive. I just opened my own office and started right then and there.
Now, what was your wife's response when you said that? What did she think?
Well, she was hoping that I would get on with a firm or start off with, somebody with a little bit of background and help me, but I just started on my own. I think today I'd be a little bit crazy to do it, but it worked out great for me.
And what was it about being a criminal defense attorney that did draw you? What was that? Because that, for most of us, most people have no experience with the criminal justice system unless they have served as a juror. So it sounds, for most of us, as, oh gosh, you are representing the bad people, you're helping them get off. What was it that drew you? Because I know you to be such a good man.
Thank you. Well, I get that asked a lot. How do you represent bad people? And the further question is, can you represent somebody that has done it? And I guess that kind of comes with the territory. I can tell you in my career, most people come to you and they're asking, I just need help. I've done something wrong, and I want a mouthpiece. I want somebody to have my back, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Have I ever had anybody come to me and say, I want to take advantage of the government and we're going to win the case? Not particularly, but most people are intimidated by the system. Because you think about it, like you just mentioned, when you get a jury summons, you're like, oh my gosh, it seems a little pressure packed. There's a lot of things that come with that. And I think if somebody is charged with a criminal event, they're not asking me to get off the case. They're asking me to have a mouthpiece. Okay? Now, representing the bad guy, as you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people have committed a crime, but there's a justification, meaning I was defending myself. I went into a home because I thought my kids were in danger. You have certain justifications. So a lot of people come to me and they'll say, I don't think I committed a crime.
Okay.
I went to a nightclub and somebody was intoxicated and started to fight with me. I was defending myself. So yeah, there's a lot of those.
All right.
The bigger, deeper question, and I guess the meaty question that people ask me of, have I ever represented somebody that I truly know was guilty? That's a tough question for a defense attorney. And do I ask that question? Ask them are they guilty? Probably not. That's not my role. My role is to help them through the system. And they may be asking to have a plea bargain awarded to them, have them get a lesser sentence for all the good things they've done in their lives rather than just the one magnified event that they've done. So sure, I've had a lot of people where I don't ask that question. But
do you think that if you do know, do you think that that would inhibit your ability to defend them?
Well, there are times that cases become more difficult. Somebody that had a simple drug charge, that the drugs are in their pocket and they've confessed. Sure, I know they've done it. But a lot of those people are just asking for help. They're asking for, please don't throw my life down the drain. I'm savable. And that's what I think my job is. My job is to kind of help them and see if I can portray them in different light. So yeah, I believe in the goodness of people. And sometimes I think the analogy that I've heard that seems to justify somebody with, say, drugs in their pocket or something, on an unfortunate event, is good people sometimes make very, very bad mistakes. And it's my job to kind of portray them in different light and see if I can get them a second take on life and see if I can help them through the system. Because the system's very intimidating. And even as an attorney, I'll admit that sometimes it's very intimidating.
I would think so. And I do think that looking at the situation from a prosecutor's point of view, they do want that event to define that person.
Correct. And that's where people sometimes come to me. They don't want an overzealous prosecutor magnifying the problem with their own personal beliefs. And sometimes that happens, versus just let me explain to you where I've gone with my life and what I've done in the past. So a lot of people are worried about that they're going to get thrown to the wolves, so to speak, or thrown into a system that they're not going to be able to get out of. And a lot of my job is to advise people about where they need to go and what they need to do. Sometimes, unfortunately, I think I told you here in Colorado Springs, we unfortunately have, there's a heroin problem going on, and heroin is a nasty, nasty drug, and it will take over kids' lives.
You told me that there's a staggering level of a problem with heroin, which blew my mind because that's not in any part of my world.
It is.
And it shocked me completely.
It is the most nasty drug that I've ever seen come through this community.
Wow. And
I think, and I've spoke to some of the judges that handle some of these cases in our community and other communities. Mm-hmm. If you have somebody that's addicted to alcohol and they are committed to the rehabilitation, most alcohol programs are 30 days or 28 days, and most of the literature says that you can give somebody the tools to correct themselves and work through the system, and if they're committed, they can get enough tools in 28 days. Methamphetamine, which you saw in the 90s, early 2000s, same type thing, 30 days. When I've spoke to other counselors involving heroin, or some of the judges that handle a lot of heroin cases, it seems to me that most of those people are saying that with the heroin addict, a year of rehabilitation is about the minimum so you can kick that problem. Not just 30 days. It is that intense. And I remember speaking to some of my clients that have struggled with alcohol versus heroin, and they'll tell you that alcohol, the best way to explain alcohol is, say an individual is when you're really hungry. You're hungry and you haven't eaten, say, 14 hours. You come home and your body's kind of taking over and you're like, I got to get something to eat. And you start heading towards the refrigerator. You're looking for food immediately. Mm-hmm. Alcohol, you magnify that times 30 to 40. That drive for alcohol. Heroin, I've heard just the opposite. That drive is 1,000 times greater than that.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it's 30 times.
1,000 times greater. And it leads to, I'm going to go to my parents' house, and I've had this come up where people just clean out their parents and take all the tools in the garage and go sell them just for the drugs. So that one right there absolutely scares me, where people go and how tough it is to beat that drug.
Wow. Well, and there is a different dynamic between, I would think, dealing with someone with strictly alcohol issues versus drug issues, because, the only laws that are broken around alcohol would be around operating a vehicle or even maybe drunk in public. When it comes to drugs, that's illicit behavior on all levels, where the drug is illegal, getting the money to supply the drug is illegal. There's so many different facets to that I would think that that's a different individual. Am I correct or incorrect in that?
Well, I think alcohol is a little bit more socially acceptable, and obviously it's legal.
Yeah, it's a legal drug.
Very rare. Yeah, you're exactly right. Rarely do you see, somebody drinking at home and everybody upset about it. In fact, I'll have drinks with my wife or have wine with dinner. Sure. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's a different stigma with drugs. Colorado's accepted marijuana as more medical in use, but the heroin use, sure, yeah, is it a different, maybe say the Broadmoor wife drinking versus heroin? Probably a little bit of a younger generation. Doesn't mean it's somebody in the Broadmoor's not going to have a heroin addiction, but I think it's a little bit of a younger kids. I would say 18 to 25. I see where most of the cases come from.
Okay, so that's the predominant demographic that is affected right now.
At least what you see across the state, and that's what the statistics are saying.
Okay. So I can understand why you would not necessarily want to know if someone is guilty or not. But I also happen to know something about you, which is that you extend yourself tremendously to people in wanting not just to help them get through the process, you want to guide them to making better choices. And that, I think, maybe, unfortunately, is unique to you, or I just don't know about the other good guys.
No.
But I love that about you and respect that about you so much.
Well, part of it is the equation too. When you're as a lawyer, you want to provide people a better opportunity, because that's what your job is as a lawyer, is to present them in better light to a judge or to a prosecutor. And I think good lawyers generally like your clients, and good lawyers generally have a passion for somebody succeeding. Sometimes it hurts me a little bit because I do get upset with the kids or the people that you thought you're on the right track and they've fallen back into another problem, and that's a little bit disheartening. I can be their lawyer and I can be their friend and I can provide them with opportunities, but yeah, I generally want my clients to succeed. I generally want them to make a better place in their life, and with all the success stories, there have been some failures, but yeah, there's some very, very true success stories. I remember helping a kid, just for talking to you, his name was Jim, heroin addict, good kid, 20 years old. He was just like my kids, I'm sure his parents had pictures of him bringing home the coloring book that he had in first grade, and they'll put it on the refrigerator, and he had some serious problems. Talking in my office, I thought he had licked the problem. He wasn't even close. He was still using it.
Wow.
But he finally had, his parents had a little bit of money, and he went to a rehab program, and he kicked it now in law school. So
outstanding.
Great story. One of the true success stories that you see. And unfortunately, I've had kids that in the same mode have not made it.
Right.
Same with alcohol. Same with drug problems. Sometimes I've had people that their first event or first brush with the law is their only brush. And those are the ones that are rewarding to me, where they've made their strides in their lives and I'm able to help them. We've worked our way through the system. It may be a trial. We've reached a plea agreement that keeps them off their record, and yeah, I hope so.
That's fantastic.
I like that, because I hope I generally believe in the goodness of people, and I always think people should always have a mouthpiece and a second chance in life, and fortunately a lot of people make it.
Well, you're much more than a mouthpiece, and that brings me to my next question, which is, What do you think about the quality or inequality of our justice system based upon economics, based upon race?
I can tell you that.
Why do we have so many people of color locked up for crimes that white people are walking free who've committed the same offense? What's up with that? Is it money?
Probably. Maybe money that they, certain socioeconomics, and it may not be a white or black answer, it may not be an Anglo answer versus Hispanic answer. It's just that I certainly believe that socioeconomics play a huge, huge part of that. And you start off with a very, it doesn't matter if it's what race, what creed, what religion you are, but if you start off a little bit in the hole in life, meaning that your mom is working, your dad is working, you're coming home from school, your parents just by the nature of working a couple jobs, it's unfortunate because they can't always help with the homework. They're not home to say, when you get home, let's do this. And some people start off at a very, very disadvantage. And I don't know if it's always white, black, Hispanic, anything. It's just that I think it starts at the home level, and people with low economics struggle.
Well, when we have 1/4 of the young black male population incarcerated, something's terribly wrong.
It is definitely socioeconomics. It is definitely, and I've always found this a little bit disheartening. Here in Colorado Springs, if you took the entire police force, 75% of the police force are working in a certain area, which is predominantly black and Hispanic, versus a white area up where I live, you never see a police officer.
No presence?
No
because
presence.
no presence needed? Or
Probably no presence needed, and there are certain areas where they are higher crime areas, and unfortunately those higher crime areas are predominantly minorities. That's very disheartening, and I don't know what that answer is. I don't think anybody knows what that answer is, and I think all of us struggle with why is it so disproportionate that a minority is in prison versus somebody that's Anglo. I don't
particularly
know
for the same crime and often under the same circumstances.
Yes, and I don't have an answer for that. I can tell you it seems a little bit unfortunate that people that have money and are able to pay for very good representation have the ability to get counseling, have the ability to show a judge that they're making strides in their life, such as going to college, have the ability to get a better plea bargain or to present themselves in more favorable light to the court system. And that's a little bit disheartening.
I think the most famous case that most of us are aware of that did not have to do with race but had to do absolutely with money was the Oj Simpson case.
Sure.
And that verdict. What did you think about that?
Well, I was in law school when that was going on, so I was following it, and probably had a little bit to do with money because he had the best experts in the world, the best experts in the world, able to rebut some of the experts that the LAPD was bringing. So he had that's the most high-profile case that will ever be in our lifetime. But
hopefully,
he definitely had a lot of money behind him that he was able to, again, discredit the government's case.
Okay. I'd like to talk about, because you do have a very successful practice and because you are one of the elite attorneys in our area, you have the ability to choose which cases you accept and the ones that you do not. Talk to me about the cases that you will not accept. When do you turn a client down, Mike?
Well, that comes up a lot in my business. And people that have been accused, unfortunately, of crimes against children, specifically sex assault, I don't particularly take those cases. Not that I don't believe in due process. Not that I don't believe in, again, the mouthpiece. Again, somebody to protect somebody's interest. But those particular cases are so involved with what happens with those cases, because certain of those cases can be life in prison. Certain of those cases can be lifetime probation, registration list. Because I'm not in tune with those and I don't do those very often, I just don't feel like I'm the attorney that can advise people. So,
do you have a moral objection
that's
to
a tough
defending
question.
those people?
And I think everybody's life takes a change. When I was younger, I would not have a moral objection. When you get a little older and you have children, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Morally, would I not represent them? No, that's not my job. My job is to be their mouthpiece and to make sure that everybody gets a fair shake. From me, it's so difficult because those laws are so complicated that I don't know that I can provide that representation. And so I don't feel like I'm giving everybody a fair shake, and I don't want to take somebody's money and take a case and not treat them fairly. And that comes up a lot in my business. I don't think you should take a case that you're familiar with.
Okay, unfamiliar with.
Yeah, that you're unfamiliar with. You should
Okay.
always take cases that you're familiar with.
Got it.
Familiar with the law or familiar about how a case is going to transpire.
So is that so complex that that would almost be someone's specialty?
Very complex because the state legislature have put extreme penalties on those cases. And as I told you, it could be prison terms indefinite. The only way you can get out of prison if you are convicted of those is if you're rehabilitated. And rehabilitated is extensive therapy, extensive use of the polygraph and things of this sort. And I just don't feel like I'm at a position where I can tell people properly how they should proceed on cases like that. Okay. And you are right, those are specialty cases. Very few lawyers do those.
Yeah. Who are the potential jurors that you don't want on your jury?
Well, certainly depends on the question. Let's go back to when we were first talking. Let's say it's a classic bar fight. Two guys squaring off in a bar. I would probably on a jury want men that have had similar situations, would understand why somebody would defend themselves. On that case, I probably would not want the elderly grandmother that adores her grandchildren and probably hasn't been receptive to those things in 30 or 40 years. I want somebody probably a little bit more willing to look at my client's case. So that particular case, yeah, that's what I'd want. Probably somebody that would understand the circumstances. So it's very, very case specific, okay?
Okay. I've always been curious, though, why some jurors are dismissed and others are not. And particularly when they have, when the client is able to afford someone who is reading the jury.
That does come up. I had a case and we had a jury expert help me a little bit. And we kind of had where we were going. That particular case, again, involved a fight. And again, that's the example that I was giving you, that we were looking for somebody that could relate. But you can pretty much tell in jury selection of who that you're going to keep and who you're not going to keep.
Okay.
Well, a typical jury selection for a 12-man jury, you're probably going to bring in 60 to 70 70 jurors, potential jurors. Some people are just not going to even want to be interested. I'm not interested. I got too many things to do, and I don't want that person.
Right, because they're going to phone it in to get out of there. If they're
Probably,
chosen.
and they're probably going to be followers rather than what I'm looking for. They're just going to be whatever the group wants.
Okay.
I always ask jurors, I have one question I always ask jurors. I'm like, hey, being on a jury is hard work.
Yes.
Are you prepared to put the work in? And some people you can tell just don't want to put the work in. Because I want people to listen, and I want people to listen to my case. And some people aren't willing to do that because they don't care. And there's also times that inevitably, when you're picking a jury, somebody will have some medical issues. They're not able to do this. There might not be there because their wife is sick. So
those are easy.
Those are easy.
Those I get. Was the overall picture. We're almost out of time, but there are a couple things that I want to talk about.
Sure.
I want you to talk about John Adams' story, but I also want to talk about the need for quality people with your level of integrity taking on this position, which is why I asked you to be here today. Because in the same sense that we support and believe in free speech, if we're going to support that, we need to be willing to listen to people who are saying absolutely things that we find reprehensible. If we are going to support our justice system, then everyone deserves representation, and quality representation if we want our system to function as it was lined out and laid out to be. And so I really hope that, I want you to know, guys, it doesn't come cheap, but if you want to have excellence and someone who's looking to do the right thing, Mike Moran, you are the man to go to.
Thank you.
And you have a heart, and you're also absolutely bloody brilliant and fast on your feet, which is a dream for anyone who's got to be facing a prosecutor in court.
Thank you.
But I'd like to close with what you told me about President John Adams.
That's a real interesting story. I'm a little bit of a history buff, and so I was reading about John Adams. He was the second president of the United States, and this is, of course, prior to him being the president, and that was the American Revolution. And we always envision, the British as the big bad empire. They've come to our country and they've taken over. But you got to put it in perspective. There was people here in the United States that supported the British. There was people that wanted them kicked out. Well, during the Boston Massacre, as probably all of us would realize, it was very intense. And the British were arguing with some Americans, revolutionaries. And of course, the sides were divided, and there was 7 to 8 British soldiers against a mob of Americans who didn't want them in our country. Well, the numbers were 6 against 100, and the British soldiers were surrounded, and they ended up firing into this mob and killing some people. Well, the 6 soldiers were arrested for murder. Well, John Adams, a revolutionary, wanted the United States to not be part of the British Empire, ended up as a lawyer taking the soldiers' case and defended them against, again, the big bad empire. He didn't want them, but he believed, and this is why I always found it fascinating, due process, a right to us to be heard, a right to justice, and ended up I think it was 8 soldiers, 6 were acquitted, meaning that they were found to be defending themselves. Okay. 1 was committed of manslaughter, and another was committed of something else. And again, a lot of people were upset about that. How can you represent people of this? Well, how can you represent people that did this? And probably hurt his practice a little bit. Because he was a lawyer, a pretty successful lawyer, and hurt his practice. And I always found this fascinating of what was he paid? He was paid the equivalent of a brand new pair of shoes back then, of around $12 to represent. I don't know how large the trial was, etc., but did a very good job. So that's kind of where what you were just talking about. I think if you're going to be an attorney, you need to embrace it and embrace what you're doing and give your clients a fair shot and be a lawyer. I understand that the lawyer jokes, as you just mentioned. However, everybody needs a mouthpiece, and I always think you need to put it in perspective as what happens if it's your kids that are in the legal system. You would want them to be treated fairly, and that's what I think we should end with. I want people to be treated fairly, Not everybody wins their case. Not everybody is found not guilty just because you hire an attorney. That doesn't happen.
Of course not.
It's, you got to do the best job that you can with what's presented to you.
And not everyone is guilty, and we don't get to try people in the media and decide we know the truth.
That is true, and that's something that I always ask when I am picking a jury, going back to what we just talked about. Are you going to be able to try the case on the facts that are presented to us? And one of the best questions that I ask is, does anybody know what the presumption of innocence is? And everybody says, what's the presumption of innocence? Oh yeah, we know it. It's a constitutional question. But I always put this in on some of the equations, and that is, well, who's your best friend? And somebody will say, well, it's my dad.
Okay.
And I'll say to them, well, what happens at lunch? Say we're picking a jury. I told you at lunch break your dad had robbed the Bank of Broadmoor across the street. And everybody's like, I don't believe it. And I'd say, well, you would presume that he's innocent. What would you expect for your father? And she would, or whoever that may be, he or she would say, well, I'd want to see the evidence. And I always then say, can you give my client that right?
Excellent question.
And that puts it into perspective.
Yeah, it frames it so
Can
that
you
we
see
can
the
think
evidence?
that.
Right. And for me, that's a very persuasive question because it puts people in the chair of my client. And that's what I'm looking
It's a very telling question.
Right.
the
And that's what I'm
answer.
looking for. Yes.
Well, you are a man who absolutely contributes to our community, to our society, and to our justice system, which I believe in for each and every one of us. I'm so happy to tell people that I know you and can call you friend.
Thank you.
Thank you for all that you do,
Absolutely.
Mike Moran.
And thanks for having me on your show.
All right. Until next time, thanks for joining us.